You're going to want to stick around for the end of this one, because if you've ever scratched your head over this Bible story, this explanation is going to shock you. So the flood is one of the best known events in the entire Bible, and even people with little or no religious background know the story of Noah's Ark. But there's a confounding finale to Noah's story, and the traditional explanation can be just a bit unsatisfying, because there's just some loose ends that don't seem to be accounted for. The story goes something like this. It's the immediate aftermath of the flood. Noah and his family have left the ark and they're starting over. Noah plants himself a vineyard, makes some wine, gets hammered, and passes out drunk and naked inside of his tent. Now, here's where we get the first mystery in the story. Noah's youngest son, Ham, somehow finds himself in the tent and, quote, saw the nakedness of his father. Now keep that phrase in mind because it's going to be important. Then comes a second mystery. After seeing a sight that would leave most of us temporarily blinded, Ham decides the best thing he should do about it is to go outside and tell his two brothers, Shem and Japheth, "Hey guys, guess what I saw? Dad's naked again." But here's where it really starts to get weird. When they hear their brother Ham's report, Shem and Japheth don't just toss a blanket in the door for their dad or have just one of them tuck him in, even though it seems like a one-man job and would minimize Noah's embarrassment anyway. But instead, they very intentionally, almost ceremoniously, both take a garment, ritually place it over their shoulders, and then they walk backward to, and here's that phrase again, cover the nakedness of their father. So what's going on here? Seems like they're making a pretty big deal out of it given the circumstances. And this is going to lead to the biggest mystery of the entire story. Now I've got to preface this. We've all been walked in on or walked in on someone else in their birthday suit at some point in our lives. And how do we normally react when that happens? Maybe we say, get out, or close the door, or if you're a woman, there's an embarrassed shriek. And then later there's that kind of awkward encounter where you both kind of ignore it happened, pretend it didn't happen, or maybe you get an embarrassed apology from the other guy. But either way, after that, everyone pretty much gets over it. Which is why what Noah does here when he finds out about Ham is inexplicable. He issues a curse. And here's the thing. He doesn't even curse Ham, the son who actually saw his nakedness. Nope. He goes straight for the nuclear option, and he actually curses his own grandson, Canaan, instead.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
And I'm not talking about just some playful little curse that Canaan always gets the heel on the loaf of bread from now on, or something like that. I'm talking about being cursed to be the servant of his relatives for all future generations. Now, usually this gets explained in church as Ham having failed to do something about his father's embarrassing situation and instead exacerbating it by telling his brothers. And we're made to believe that because of this, he was humiliating Noah and kind of deserved what he got. But can we all at least admit that Noah's reaction to just being seen naked is just a little extreme? It doesn't make sense to say it's because times were different then and it was a taboo. Remember, Noah and his family had just survived what might be the most sexually depraved period in all of human history. An era so bad, God literally finds it necessary to hit the reset button on the entire world. Now, given that they had to actually be able to function in that kind of society, I kind of doubt that they could if it was that big a taboo just to see a little nudity. I mean, look at us today. I think our culture's pretty depraved, but I'm thinking we're not quite as bad as the antediluvian era yet. Imagine how hard it'd be for Noah's family to survive in a society with even more gratuitous promiscuity than we have today. Besides, they just spent a year together floating around the Middle East in a really confined space. I can't even spend a week with extended family in a rented house without accidentally seeing unspeakable things that can never be unseen. Can you imagine the level of unwanted familiarity after a year on the ark? So all this is to say, I don't think Noah being caught naked would have been that big a deal. So what's going on here? Well, remember that phrase I told you to remember? Ham saw the nakedness of his father? It's kind of an awkward phrasing. What does it mean to see the nakedness of someone as opposed to just seeing them naked? Well, it turns out we have an answer, and it's not what you think. The answers to these mysteries lie in Leviticus chapter 18. Leviticus 18 has given us God's laws on prohibited sexual behaviors. So let's look specifically at verses 7 and 8. It says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. So you see, uncovering someone's nakedness is a euphemism for sex. And here, Moses clearly equivocates uncovering the nakedness of your father as being intercourse with your mother. And in case you're still unconvinced, just go skip ahead to verse 14. It says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. That is, you shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. Again, Moses is making it crystal clear here that when I say nakedness of your male relatives, I'm really talking about their wives. And in case you still haven't grasped it yet, look at Leviticus 20, just 2 chapters later, verse 11. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. So when Ham sees his father's nakedness, well, you do the math. But wait, you say, Ham only saw the nakedness of his father, not uncovered. But it's the same euphemism. Go to Leviticus 20, verse 17. If a man takes his sister and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, he has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity. See, uncover, whatever. They're both the same euphemism, and they both mean an illicit, or in this case, incestuous sexual relationship. So let's look at the story again with this new perspective, because suddenly it starts to make a lot more sense. Let's start with why Ham is there in the first place. Now, Ham is Noah's youngest son, which traditionally means he's not next in line for assuming his father's patriarchal authority. He's not going to get that double inheritance that the eldest son would get. But in ancient Near Eastern cultures, one way you showed you were claiming the authority of a predecessor, particularly one that you had a hand in overthrowing or displacing, was you slept with their wives and their concubines. And there's actually a bunch of references to this in the Bible, including David taking Saul's wives and concubines when he becomes king, and Absalom publicly sleeping with David's concubines when he usurps the throne, or Adonijah trying to take David's wife Abishag. The point is, Ham doing that would have been a way for him to usurp power and then jump the successionary line in front of his brothers, which makes sense because that'd explain the second mystery, which is why would Ham go and tell his brothers immediately after he does this in the first place? Well, the reason's simple. If you're making a political power move to usurp authority, you can't be the only one who knows you did it. You kind of have to tell somebody. It was symbolic and calculating, not just malicious. So Ham's got to make sure that his brothers got the message. And this might help explain Shem and Japheth's strange, overly formal reaction to the whole thing. They ceremoniously drape that cloak over both of their shoulders and they walk backward into the tent to cover their father's nakedness, which, as you now know, would actually be their mother. And by doing this overly solemn ritual, it makes sense if they're trying to signal their disapproval not to their father, who, remember, he's still drunk and passed out, but to their mother, who might have been trying to recover from this heinous act. It's their way of making it really clear that, hey, we had nothing to do with this, we don't approve, leave us out of it. And that brings us to the conclusion of the story, which usually is the biggest sticking point of the whole thing. But if this is how it all went down, and seeing Noah's nakedness actually means having relations with his wife, we finally have a satisfying explanation for why Noah goes to the extremes that he does when he finds out. In this case, he's not just overreacting to the embarrassment of being seen naked and then cursing his own grandson. He's cursing his grandson because Canaan is the product of a heinous, sinful, disgusting act. It gives the ancient Israelites the origin story of the Canaanites, a culture that would continue down a road to depravity so total that God would sentence their civilization to complete destruction. This just goes to show you that as Christians, sometimes we overlook some of the Old Testament because it seems irrelevant and boring, but you really can't grasp the full complexity, the wisdom and beauty of the Bible if you don't read the whole thing and understand how these various things in the OT relate to each other. The Bible becomes 1,000 layers deeper once you start seeing all these connections. Hope that helped make sense of an otherwise troubling story from Genesis. And have a great day.